Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the International Foundation for Autoimmune and Autoinflammatory Arthritis, or AiArthritis, as we go live to EULAR. Got the sign behind. Oh, wrong way. That way. That way. My name is Tiffany Westrich-Robertson. I am the CEO of the organization, and we call it for short AiArthritis for that acronym. I'm also a person living with arthritis diseases. My primary is non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis, and used to be RA, rheumatoid arthritis, but that has since evolved, like many of us. Hint, hint, Patrice, who will say hello here in a minute, and then also there's also some that are looming in the background. But I'm going to quickly turn it over to let my other colleagues here say hello, and then we'll jump back into what we're doing today. Deb, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I am Deb Constien. I am a person also living with RA in particular. So that is the diagnosis that I received at the age of 13. So I've actually been living with that disease for probably 37 or 38 years. I'm not going to do the quick math in my head. And I've got also a bunch of comorbidities. And Tiffany and I tend to go to conferences together. So this is not anything unusual for us. So we're kind of jumping into it. But then we've got Patrice.
Hi,
Hi,
everyone.
Patrice.
Hi. My name is Patrice Johnson, and 9 years ago, I was diagnosed with RA, but last year, it seems that I was misdiagnosed. So right now, I don't know what I have, but I do have some comorbidities as well. And I'm just happy to be here, even though we didn't get to attend in person. The e-Congress was just fascinating for me. So thank you for letting me join.
Well, we're glad that you came along with us, Patrice. And so, what Patrice was alluding to there is what we're doing here, and the topic is with us to EULAR 2020. And what that literally means is every year, as Deb already mentioned, she and I typically are the ones that we've been going to a lot of the conferences. We also have others from our organization that go, but she and I usually are the ones going abroad. And there's two every year there that are the scientific rheumatology conventions. The first one is the American College of Rheumatology, or the ACR, and that's typically towards the end of the year and around November, and that is hosted somewhere in the United States. And then also we go and attend EULAR, which stands for the European League Against Rheumatism. And they have an e-Congress somewhere in Europe. And this year it was going to be in Frankfurt, Germany. And so because of COVID-19, we're here online. So for how long, Deb? For 3 months, right? It was 3 months. So the original conference was supposed to be June 3rd through the 6th. And typically Deb and I, or whomever is attending these conferences, as patients were running around and trying really hard not to flare. and we were a little grateful this time that it's online and we can watch these at our leisure. And something also very great that they did this year is they are inviting all patients to attend for free. Now, we would have attended anyway as members of organizations, but if you are interested in seeing some of these scientific sessions on your own and you are a person living with the diseases, those sessions, the ones we're talking about today, and all of the ones we talked about in debriefs that we have been doing for 4 weeks already, all through June, that are also on this YouTube channel, all of those are available for you to watch as well. So we are now starting our official Go With Us. We've done all of this great review for, gosh, how many sessions have we seen?
A lot.
I would say in the upper end of about 20.
Yeah,
that is kind of what I'm guessing now.
Yeah, we did about 4 to 5 every week, and we've been 4 weeks. Yeah, so that probably makes sense.
Yes. So we have been going through to watch all of the sessions. And one of the things is that scientific sessions are a little bit different than regular conferences that may be geared towards having patients there regularly. And so it can be a little bit difficult to navigate them or to understand them, since they are geared often to rheumatologists and researchers. But we've been going for quite a while, so we are able to bring that information to you and break it down so that we can have conversations together, patient to patient. We can field your questions as much as we can from what you'll see is somewhat limited research when it comes to the topic today, and that is COVID-19. So we thought that we would start off by each talking a little bit about how, as a rheumatic patient, COVID-19 has affected us. And you, if you're watching right now or you're tuning in, please feel free to add your stories to the comments. We'd love to hear from you. So Deb, would you like to start off?
Sure. And I was going to give a shout out to Deanna. She's actually already hopped in, and she said that she is diagnosed with PSA and spondyloarthritis about 6 years ago and started her 6th biologic yesterday. Go, Deanne. Holy. But yeah, my journey, again, when this first rolled out and starting to think about the seriousness of what this is and learn from the other countries, because again, it started in China and it took a while to get here to the States, so you kind of followed along a little bit, but then as it was catching up, it was getting a little nerve-wracking for the for immunocompromised folks like us being on the medications we are. And my son's school, he is in college, a junior in college, and college was cut short. He was sent home to finish. And having him in the house and my husband, they would leave the house. Again, we were on, shutdown, but it's a different kind of shutdown. My husband's job is considered essential. So he went out and, went into work here and there, and he would go to the grocery store for me. I can probably count in 3.5 months or 4 months now, on both hands, how many times I've really been out of the house. And a couple of those times were only to go for car rides. It's nerve-wracking. I still am not all that comfortable going out. I have masks and I do wear a mask if I've gone out recently. I've got a 21-year-old in this house, and he is a millennial and has a different feeling about the seriousness of these diseases, even though, early on, my husband and I were like, buddy, no, you can't have your friends over. No, you can't go and meet up with your friends. And a couple times he did, and my husband would go to the grocery store, come back. Our method was they would immediately, in the laundry room.
Yes.
All the clothes go right into the
yes
machine and start the washing machine, and they go straight to the shower. We've backed off a little bit on that, not quite so stringent, but I'm still nervous, and the thought of getting it. And we're early July now, and the thoughts of flying, any of that just makes me really nervous. So that's kind of what my personal journey's been, just trying to keep my son in check, and that's been a challenge. I feel bad for him too. He didn't ask to have a mom with, immune compromised disease. So it's been interesting.
Well, thanks, Deb. Patrice, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experiences as a rheumatic patient and in the era of COVID?
Well, I think all of us have kind of the same concerns because we have the compromised immune system, but I'm over the age of 60, and the initial reports were coming out saying I'm a double whammy or a double risk. And so when the first, even before my state went to lockdown, I was staying home. I have 5 grandchildren, and 4 of them don't live nearby, but one of them does, and she's only 3. And so trying to explain on, FaceTime, we're sick. And, she kind of bought that for about 3 weeks. She's a smart little whippersnapper. And, then she kept saying, well, when are you going to get better? When are you going to get better? I want to come see you. I want to come to your house. And, it was just like, well, we're still sick. And so trying to explain that to a 3-year-old. Now, the 3 older grandchildren of mine, they understood. They were being homeschooled by my daughter. And then, the social media that kind of had a life of its own. So in my state now, we are, the restrictions have been lifted. However, 2 weeks ago, it was mandatory that you wear a mask when you are in a public place, grocery store, something like that, dry cleaners, wherever you go. And of course, most people, half are wearing them, half aren't. And then there's all the things on Facebook that, well, you're limiting my freedoms by making me wear a mask. And it's been hard for me. I've been trying to educate people. You're not only a Facebook friend, but I also know you personally. We run in the same circles. We network in the same areas. We live and work in this town. And it's hard to convince people when they say, well, I'm not sick. I'm not a high risk. I don't really care. So that's been my journey and my fears.
One thing in particular, sorry, Tiffany, to interrupt, but one thing in particular that you mentioned, again, with, how you talked about your friends, my son's friends, again, some of them are like, oh, we understand why you have to be, so shut down. But a lot of them are like, this COVID is a myth. It doesn't exist. It's being embellished. It's scary.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of the things that I wrote down that I think are relevant. One of the reasons that we're all going to, and I'll say my story here next, but the reason we wanted to start off with patient stories was kind of twofold. First, wanted to just ask everybody to think about their story and their journey, because we believe at our organization that the stories of the patients really can drive research. Understanding what patients' fears are, what our needs are, those are the kind of things that if a researcher or a doctor is listening to, then they know how to treat us. They know what type of things that we need. And some of the things that came up and what Deb and Patrice both said, we'll be mentioning here as we move out in this conversation today on what we've learned about COVID-19 in the rheumatology world by attending EULAR 2020. And one of those things we'll circle back to is anxiety. I heard it really in both of you. There were quite a few really interesting studies on anxiety. And so that one we will hit. But then another one that I think Patrice, just you saying, you on Facebook or on social media, the point being that maybe are you being heard, or Deb, you saying, a lot of people still think that this is, embellished. I mean, I hear it too. And Patrice, your comment about, well, where I live, we just 2 weeks ago, and we have to date this. This is July 7th, 2020, where you lived just a couple weeks ago, people had to wear masks all the time. And now it's been lifted. For where I live, also in the United States, that's just started. So I think the point is this ever changing, evolutionary, things are different depending where you live. All of those things we'll cover here. So again, listening to the stories of people who live in the rheumatic world, it is important to understand so we can relate back and help researchers to build what they're doing in our community. So that whole, including the patient voice, we'll circle back on that as well. Now, my story is a little bit different. Some of you who may have tuned in, we have our debriefs, and we have an AiArthritis Voices 360 talk show that I often am one of the main co-hosts of. I've talked very openly about my experiences since February, so I won't go into great detail. Only to say that we are not sure if I experienced COVID or not. I can tell you that I had all of the symptoms. And in addition to having the symptoms, I also somehow had a virus. A virus caused my heart to become inflamed. So I started experiencing pericarditis, and I've never had any kind of inflammation in my inflammatory markers as a rheumatic patient ever. And so for something to come up at the exact same time that COVID hit our state and had the same symptoms and attacked my heart, well, we don't know. It seems like a little bit of a coincidence. But one of the things that really stood out from what you said, Patrice, is the voice, and me saying over and over, listen to me, listen to me. This is not my autoimmune disease. This is not normal. And not being able to have a test, and all of these things that really are going to affect research today. Because what we found when we're going through these sessions is one thing that kept coming up over and over: there's no denominator, which means there's no set number that we know of people who are affected with COVID or who have been affected with COVID today. So it's really important to think about that when we start to go into the research, because it's early, this is an unknown disease, and without everybody's voice being counted, it's impossible to fully know this early how COVID is affecting the general population and specific populations too, like people with rheumatic diseases. So I did want to preface that. And I thought just a good way to start off would be talking a little bit generally about the research that we have heard and where this research came from. So Deb's going to tell you a little bit about the specific research in the rheumatic community, but I wanted to preface it by mentioning where this research is coming from. What we call, a lot of them are called registries, or these are places where you as a patient can have your voice submitted. You can submit your story. You can say your experience with COVID, and then the researchers will be able to figure out how many of us are being affected, how serious it was. There's other ways your doctors can submit to these registries as well. So there are many ways that we are collecting the data right now, but it's very early. And in these registries, so one of them that you may have heard about is called the COVID-19 Global Rheumatology Alliance, or GRA for short. Now, what happened, and this is very in keeping with some of the other stuff that we've learned. What happened was when COVID began, there was a global urgency to start logging research now.
Documenting.
And for every disease group. But remember, our disease group, all of a sudden, the first types of medications that are being tested out are in our conditions. So a lot of rheumatologists around the world came together and started this alliance, and we were invited to be one of the patient groups part of it. So we did appreciate that invite, and we were responsible for giving input on the patient surveys that go with the GRA. But there were a lot of other things happening at the same time. Many other registries were opening. So there are numerous in our community. And you might be asking, how do I lend my voice if I don't know which ones exactly to go to? So we have 3 that we specifically are involved in that we will link to. But in these particular registries, I'll let Deb give you an overview of what they found out, and then we'll discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So they talked about like risk factors for being at a risk of being hospitalized. So they talked about 2 diseases in particular that they said you tend to be at a higher risk for being hospitalized, and those diseases were lupus and vasculitis. And they said you have a lesser chance of being hospitalized if you have psoriatic arthritis, Deanna, and ankylosing spondylitis. Now, in theory, when you think about lupus and vasculitis, they're very complex diseases. So, so many different parts of your body are affected by those diseases, and COVID affects many different parts of your body. So that just spoke to that piece. But they also talked about comorbidities. So being of an older age and comorbidities, you have an increased risk of being hospitalized. And they talked about biologics and our NSAIDs. So those are our medications like Celebrex, our anti-inflammatory type medications. That's what the NSAIDs are. And hydroxychloroquine, which is part of lupus treatment. They were not associated with a higher risk of hospitalization, which was interesting. They also said that the anti-TNF treatments, which are the type of biologics that target your T cells. Again, okay, guys, throw out one of the T cell inhibitors. I'm completely blanking. It's been a while since I've been on one.
TNF5, the like Enbrel.
Enbrel. Okay, I was just trying to think of off the top, just so people know, for example, what I was talking about. So they talk about the T cell inhibitors are decreased odds of being hospitalized. So that was interesting. But one thing in particular, they talked about the glucocorticoids, which are steroids. They talked about moderate to high doses were associated with higher risk of hospitalization. And that was one thing in particular that we found very interesting. I'm still on steroids, not a very high dose. I'm on 6 milligrams a day, and I've never been off in 38 years of having RA. But do we want to talk about just our association with steroids? And there's a reason for being on steroids when you have the diseases like we do. So we don't want to, one thing that we've talked about in particular is we don't want to stop our medications. And that was the overarching principle that we really, really heard loud and clear from all of the guidelines and all of the recommendations for COVID was you do not want to stop any of your medications, and you don't want to stop steroids in particular too, for the reasons that I just mentioned, because you're obviously on it for a reason. Tiffany, do you want?
Well, I was just going to ask you both. I don't take, well, I take steroid. I've had to take steroids recently because of the pericarditis because it wouldn't go away. I think finally about a week or two ago, after 3.5 months, it has, but it was because they put me on a small dose of steroids. But I was just curious if anybody who listens to this, you could put in the comments, even if you're not watching live, we're interested to know a little bit about your experience, your concerns with taking the medication. I know things have changed from the beginning.
Yeah.
Everybody was asking, what do I do? Do I, if I take my medications, then I'm going to lower my immune system. And then what if I get COVID? And so that was a big fear. And then it was, well, but I'm on steroids and that's a problem too. So I was just curious, first of all, if either one of you had anything to share along those lines.
So real quick, I'm on Humira, my second time around of actually being on it. So that's my biologic, and I'm on a NSAID, which is Celebrex, and I'm also on steroids. I'm on vast amounts of medication, and I did question it early on. I started thinking, I hadn't thought about the steroids as much because I hadn't heard as much about that. But the biologics, that was the overarching conversation I heard on podcasts and other things, and any of the things that I was reading. So I did think about it. But at this point right now, with everything we have learned, I am comfortable with where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm on steroids, but I wasn't too concerned about that. So it was in the back of my mind, but not at the forefront.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things to point out about this was, so we kind of alluded to guidelines before, and essentially early on, again, we're rushing, right? There needs to be some guidance. How do we treat patients with rheumatic diseases? So what ended up happening is the ACR, who I referenced earlier, and EULAR, they both are governing agencies who create guidance for rheumatology, just one's in Europe and one's, in Northern America. And so they both got to work on creating these guidelines. And when they compared them, they actually are very similar. And that's reassuring, right? But there were a couple differences, and it was interesting for them to put those two together. And people have asked us, why didn't you post when the ACR, because they came out first? They said, why haven't you posted in your COVID-19 and AiArthritis group the ACR guidelines for treating COVID? I got lots of messages, and I kept saying, because there's more coming. And that's very true. There are just more coming, and so EULAR came out with theirs shortly after. But the biggest differences were really because of the location. So the overarching was, do not stop your medications, and even steroids. But you do also need to talk to your rheumatologist about any switching, and especially if you think that you're affected by COVID, because that can change the way that they will monitor your diseases. The other thing that the reason that there were some that were were slightly different were because of the location. So at the time, which was early April, when the ACRs came out in the United States, there was all of a sudden a big shortage of hydroxychloroquine because of president saying let's use it, and a lot of other early research coming out and saying this is great, it's a miracle drug. And what ended up happening was people were pre-ordering it, people were hoarding it, and people were using it that maybe didn't need to use it, and the list goes on and on. That was all happening when the guidelines came about. So the doctors in response were thinking more about the preservation and distribution of medications, whereas people in Europe were thinking a little bit differently. So that's one of the reasons why the guidance is slightly different. But they made a very good point, and that was that these are they are living documents, because this is a changing daily situation. And so they fully intend to continue to update those. And I think that is also another reason why we as patients need to be vocal, because if they're going to be updating guidance to treat us, we need to be vocal on what we want in our treatment plan, the things we are concerned about, the things that we want to consider, to do shared decision making with our doctor in our program, in our own treatment plan. So that did come up as well. Excuse me. Oh, I need to take a drink out of my German stein.
Yes, there you go. I love it.
It's only water, but still, we have a German theme, so I'm trying to keep it real, since we should have been in Germany. But the other thing about did you tell us all of there was another research too? I think you said that EULAR Pare had given you some data as well.
I have so the one research group, there was a researcher that presented her data, and she was looking at guidelines, and she looked at I've got the information up, but she was looking at kind of the overall guidelines that were being offered, and she started, what was the time frame? I'm trying to remember that. Oh, it was
I have that one in front of me. I can help you.
That one
in
February
27th through May 15th. She found 188 guidelines that were out there, and the major principle that she found was that the guidelines did not have appropriate methodology. They were they didn't follow the standards of what research is all about, and the out of all of them, only 8 of them were, fairly on target, and only one guideline explicitly involved patients in the developmental process. That's scary. And she talked about just, how all of the guidelines fell short on basic standards for, all the rigorous strategies that the guidelines, usually protocol takes. And it was lacking. And one thing that they talked about was the possibility of it being too rushed, because everybody was trying to get their information published right away. And she said, no, it really wasn't, because one of the earliest guidelines that was published was one of the best. So she said it can't be the rushing. It's just,
It's possible. She said
exactly.
it was possible. So essentially what happens, just to give a generic overview, what happens in research is there are certain guidance, like think of it as like check boxes. And so if there's a group of check boxes, in order to meet rigorous standards of research, every one of those check boxes are ticked off.
Yep.
And so what Deb was explaining was as this team wanted to really see, well, gosh, we've got guidelines coming from everywhere. And you got to remember too, these are experts. And this is something I know I've talked about with other patients as going through this whole COVID journey is I'm hearing experts on television. I'm seeing expert journals in the Scientist and, in the Lancet, in all of these very well renowned journals. And I want to believe it because it's by these experts, right? And so one of the things that all these 188, these aren't just like your Joe Schmo on the corner, creating research. These are really prestigious people. So it's not that what they're saying isn't good information. We want to make sure that's clarified. But what is happening in this time of COVID that we all have to remember as we're seeing this influx of information coming out every day on social media, on the news, on reputable stations, on reputable journals, is that it's too early to know. And so when you look at this with eight out of 88 hit every one of those check boxes.
188.
100, yeah.
108 out of
188, yes.
had only hit those tick boxes. And the fact that only one patient was recognized, Deb, that's
horrible.
That's horrible, because one of the key methodology frameworks is that patients are included. And, we had talked about this we went into these parts of research in much more detail in our debriefs. We have 4 debriefs that we did in June, all on this YouTube channel. So we just wanted to give you all an opportunity to join the conversation. So you could certainly listen to that one was, I think, debrief number 2 that we talk about this in more detail. But what I think to point out is that even at time of pressure, the best of the best who are experts need to remember that we're experts too.
Absolutely.
It is also an expert. And so if there's going to be guidance on how to treat us, then our voices need to be counted. Absolutely. And so I think that's something as a community that we really need to start thinking more about in ways that we can get involved. And in AiArthritis at our organization, we work very hard to do that. So if you are a person living with rheumatic diseases and you want to get more involved in research, you want your voices counted in these types of clinical guidance, come to us, because we are going to be continuing to put ourselves out there and say, we're here, listen to us. So you can definitely contact us for that. There were a couple of things I wanted to circle back on.
Can I interrupt you for just a second?
Absolutely.
Hey, I want to give a shout out to Kelly Conway. Welcome. And I did ask in the chat, Deanna about her medication. She said she had a rheumatologist appointment a couple months ago. And she said that I could stay on that. Some research showed that there were an autoimmune fire.
I know what this is.
COVID patients, and that and we were already trying to calm that storm with our medications. And she said they are supposedly less of us with AI issues that were getting sick than the general population.
Okay, we can definitely speak on this one.
Bring that up.
Yeah. So okay, that's great, because that's on our list of the things that we were going to bring up. So thanks, Deanne, for that nice segue. So yes, what you're talking about is the cytokine storm. And this is what is being mimicked in COVID patients that are getting into the later stage. Now, there's one slide. Unfortunately, we just can't share the slides right now. But if you but we will have other opportunities to share those with you at a later date. We just toggling through. But there was a really nice slide, and it showed 10 phases of COVID. And they talk about the last 10% is where that cytokine storm happens. And it's essentially an influx of the immune system when it goes completely haywire and out of control. And so often that's what's causing the lungs or the heart to give way. And this was actually in one of the diseases that we focus on very strongly. It's one of our core 8 that we have, that we do under our umbrella at AiArthritis is Still's disease. And Still's disease has it's a macrophage activation syndrome, or MAS. And that is being shown more often in the severe patients. That's what you're seeing. That's what they're talking about. And also with juvenile patients, where they're seeing that happening also. And so with these cytokine storms, the way that they're currently treated is with some of our medications. And so Deanne, your rheumatologist, was exactly right. And what they said was our medications are being used, or tested, we should say. The research is still too early. And I actually have a whole page, nothing on, but just that. There was one specific COVID, I think it was I don't remember. It doesn't matter what the name of it was, but it was talking about all of the different medications that they're using right now, and they're trying to test if they're working well in COVID patients. So a couple of them might sound familiar to people. Actemra was one of them. Kineret was another one. And they were, and many of the TNFI inhibitors, which Deb mentioned. Now, what you have to really just understand in general terms about these biologics is that they target different mechanisms of action. They have different things in our body. So it could, like, T cells, B cells, all these different things, these pieces that are in our body. And so the biologic will target different things. And what's happening as more biologics are created is you'll see the early ones will say TNFI. So they're inhibiting certain things. Whereas then you have these IL-6, IL-18. They're targeting something different, or they're inhibiting something different. They all work to either stimulate or inhibit. And so finding the right one that's working for everybody is important. But what they tested with the TNFIs, which that's one of that I'm on Cimzia. And there has been several of the registries we've mentioned. And also with, in this particular session, they said that with the research with TNF inhibitors, that it could protect patients from very severe complications or death. But it's just too early to know. So they also talked about there was some of these others that it says with Actemra in particular, approval of survival rates spiked, but it had a high prevalence of bacterial infections. So it was just there was some play on it. But what you have to remember are these studies are relatively small. There are some with a few hundred, even up to a couple thousand, but the conclusions really were promising, but too early to know. And there either, at the time that I saw this, which was a month ago, there were either no randomized clinical trials, which is sort of the golden standard of testing things in a clinical trial, but they were planning on doing up to, I think it was 9 or 10 of our treatments in a study in France called the Corimuno, CORIMUNO 19 study. And that is going to happen here in the next couple of months. And they're going to be testing, it looks like 9 or 10 of ours in RCTs, in random clinical, in randomized clinical trials. So those are the studies that we need. So all of the information that we're taking, and all of the things like Deanne, what your doctor said, all of these signs are pointing to it's going to work. All of these signs are pointing to our medications are helping it, if nothing else, to keep the death rate down. And I know in our own community, we've talked about, I want to know, or if I did have COVID, did my TNF, inhibitor help me? Did it, I don't know. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing if we're on these and they end up helping? But the important thing to really take away is we need more people to talk. So if you think that you have experienced COVID and you are on a biologic, I strongly encourage you to
Your
reach
information.
out to us. We have 3 different registries that we are participating in. One is from our friends, led by our friends at Creaky Joints, Global Healthy Living Foundation. Holla to them. Another one, Forward National Databank, and holla to you as well. And then also the COVID-19 Global Rheumatology Alliance. So all 3 of those we're participating in. I've had my voice counted. You need to have your voice counted, because every bit of this information that we are sharing with you is considered preliminary.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how else to strongly state that. And that goes for every article that you see that's published right now. Regardless of where it's at, we have to keep in mind that it's promising, but it's still too early to know.
Deanne went on to say, she said that her last biologic and her current one are JAK inhibitors, which, and Kelly is on a IL-6 medication. Hey, Patrice, as far as, all of this information goes and learning about research, what are some of the takeaways you've actually had, being new to these type of scientific meetings?
At first, I thought this was going to be so scientific, it would be so over my head. And yes, some of them were a little bit more complicated, but I like doing research. So when I would watch these sessions, I would actually and then I typed my notes up. I would actually go back through like a day later and just Google everything. So I've learned a ton of information. It's incredible. What these doctors and researchers have done, it's almost opened up a whole new world for me. And I never really kind of was very interested in the scientific end of my disease, but I think it's a good thing to learn for me. And so it's been quite an interesting journey, and I'm looking forward to learning more. And I cannot wait until we actually go in person next year, hopefully.
Hopefully. And that will be in France. So I won't have my beer stein. I will have something different.
Glass of wine.
That's Paris.
Well, one of the things I just wanted to very quickly circle back before we jump into a couple, we're kind of being a little pressed for time, but I wanted to jump into a couple other of the studies that we saw. But first, you were talking about steroids a bit ago, and I was going to go back to that. 2 things. As we're talking about this research, there was actually a study that a researcher did. It's sort of similar to what Deb was talking about with understanding the clinical guidelines and making sure that the information we're seeing is robust, or it's ticking all the boxes that a normal peer-reviewed rigorous study would do to be able to be published. And they're just not doing that right now when it comes to COVID, because we have to have something. So there's a lot of guards are down, and a lot of information is coming out that can change. That's why it's changing quickly, because we don't have 6 months to a year to 2 years invested in this research. But one of the researchers posted, she called it all that glitters isn't gold. And I just thought that was brilliant. It was a very interesting research study. And she showed specifically the hype to the non so hype about hydroxychloroquine, and how it showed in these early studies how amazing it was. But then as you bring more people in and more people in and more people in, the numbers go down and down and down. And the more that you check those boxes off, down, down, down. And what it showed me as a patient who's been participating in research for a decade now, oh my gosh, wow, a decade now, is that it really does matter to have all our voices counted, because what was thought to be a miracle drug ended up not being so and causing complications. And that's why the research that is thoughtful, that is not rushed, and even if it is rushed, that it still ticks all those boxes are important. And having as many of us, so Deanne and Kelly and everybody who's tuning in, we just have to remember we have to submit our stories with COVID, especially the rheumatology community, especially because it's our drugs that are being tested. So we really need to make sure that we're doing that. So I wanted to mention that. And then the other thing was the steroids. So
Yeah.
Deb gave you some statistics before, and I think we've heard them a lot throughout with the steroids that they really drastically lower your immune system. Even with my pericarditis, they were worried to put me on too much. They kept me on a very low dose, and they said only if this doesn't work will we put you up on the doses. But there were a couple things to point out, and again, talk to your rheumatologist. But yes, they prefer people to be weaning off steroids if possible. That is very key to understand here, if possible. Because think about if you're on steroids, why are you on steroids? It's not for fun.
And it's side effects.
It's not. It's definitely not because it's flattering by any means for any purpose at all. But it's because there's something that's uncontrolled in your body. There's something that is not under control, and other medications are not working, which in other reviews that we do, we'll talk more about the specific, about other things other than COVID, including multiple stacking and them looking at our diseases, even rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis as system diseases. So that's to come, though. So you have to tune into a future one for that. But anyway, so steroids. So one of the things that was interesting is, even though, please do not just go off your steroids because you're scared, because a couple of reasons. One, this is a very uncertain time. Now, depending on where you live in the world, things are opening back up. It might be easier to get into a doctor to see, but if you need to be on steroids because you have uncontrolled disease, if you go off of them and it gets uncontrolled, you're in a worse position because you may not have access to your doctor. It may get out of control to the point you can't get it back under control. And your immune system goes down when you're stressed. Okay. So don't just go off of them. Interestingly, though, this really caught us when that one session that I attended that was testing all of our treatments at stage 10. So again, they broke down COVID into 10 parts. And they said, once you get between 9 and 10, that's when those cytokine storms that Deanne was talking about earlier, that's when those start to happen. And what they're testing now, and with some success, and again, just remember this is early. So not all that glitters is gold. Let's just keep that in mind. But for right now, it's silver lining. Let's look at it that way. It's a silver. It's a silver glitter. Yep. Is that they are giving steroids to people in that 9 to 10 category, and it is helping them. But I think that makes sense.
It kind of does, at the end stage. I mean, it's the last fail resort type thing, and it kind of calms things down.
It calms it down. And I mean, that makes so much sense to me. So what is ironic takeaway here is, in the beginning, when you're trying not to get COVID, you want to make sure your immune system is strong as possible. But when you're at 9 or 10, when you're at that last phase, and now they're going to steroids to help, it's a really ironic twist, I think.
It is. Yeah.
So that one is something. I did want to touch on at least the anxiety part.
Yep.
We started with that when we were sharing stories, and they did some studies, and I don't want to be the one talking the whole time. So maybe Patrice, you can start talking a little bit about this one. I'll prep you here. This is what there was a study that was done in the UK, and it was on anxiety with people in the COVID era, and they were rheumatic patients, correct?
They were.
Yes.
They were. Okay. So if
Yes.
somebody, if Patrice and Deb want to lead that, I could fill in the blanks.
Okay. I've got one of the screens up. Do you have some information about that? It was basically, what happens with the psychological effects and things like that. Do you remember that?
Yes, and they were saying that it's people were having their fears, which is what we all voiced. Yeah. And then when, I don't care where you were in the world, and when these countries, some of them were on these major lockdowns. I mean, in my state, in the US, you could still go out if you wanted to. I mean, who would? But some of these countries where
a lot of people, Deb's son.
Some of these countries where they couldn't even leave their apartments. I mean, talk about social isolation. I think that would, whether you have these diseases or not, I mean, my gosh, that would impact anyone going stir crazy. I mean, could you imagine being in a 600 square foot flat or apartment and you can't go anywhere? What are you going to do? Yeah. And but and then when they talk about people with our diseases, we also have that extra fear, and fear can lead to stress. Stress is fear, and your mental well-being comes into play, and how do you get through that? I mean, maybe some people have can do the FaceTime calls with their families, but suppose it's this person who doesn't have anybody to talk to. What did they do, and how did they get through it?
Yeah. Did you want to fill in some of the findings?
Yeah, because so it was particularly done in Austria. This qualitative study was done in Austria. And
I got it wrong. I said UK. Sorry.
That's okay. So they talked about doing 66 semi-structured telephone calls and interviews over the phone. And there were 33 people that completed the whole thing, and they were between the ages of 46 and 92. And they were in different living situations, but they all had a rheumatic disease in particular. And some of the questions that they asked, they were asking certain questions about how do they feel, while having these diseases or having COVID in the COVID era and just being on lockdown. They talked about the isolation and the feeling of being trapped. They had a couple quotes from people. This was a 79-year-old woman. They lock us up in here and won't let us out. Security is down there around the clock. We have to stay in our apartments and can't have any contact with the outside world except for by phone. That's no kind of life. And that was a 79-year-old geriatric patient. Some other ones, again, it was really interesting. One other person, 52 years old, temporarily living with their parents, not having any therapy makes me feel bad. I have pain in my back and neck again. And after the operation on my leg, it is very important to have lymph drainage so that it heals. So things like that are not getting easier. None of it's happening now because, again, they were on lockdown. Let me go back.
There was what is this the same study where they came back and said that the biggest fears were biologics and
yeah,
I can't read my own writing.
I know.
It was high, the anxiety was higher in women.
Yes.
Oh, those on steroids and those on biologics, but
yes.
There was no difference in the heightened anxiety yes. in regards to age, education, or employment status.
Yes. And the employment status, I mean, that was interesting for us because we're thinking, if you lost your job, you'd think your anxiety would go up, but it was still staying,
But it also might depend on where you live in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Talking about when we were having the debrief, we were talking about, the difference of what lockdown means here in the United States versus over in the, in Europe. And
Well, exactly. And the times I know that we've spent in Europe, there's a different mindset when it comes to work, and it's a different work, it's different mentality.
yes,
In the United States, it's very you work
and you
you
keep
work
working.
to morning to night, and there's very little time off, and it's just all about work. So I think that so it would be interesting. So one of the things that we also wanted to kind of ask our community are what are the top things that caused you to have anxiety throughout this,
Yeah,
and the other part of that is the rehabilitation. They had a whole session on what I never even
Yeah.
thought about. We all have to rehabilitate from COVID-19, which is it was really eye-opening to me, because one of the things that came up in the EULAR parade, and when we say parade, we're talking, I have it behind me.
yes, there it is. You are sorry.
My bun was in the way.
Yes.
So what that is EULAR has 3 pillars, and unlike the ACR in the United States, it has 2 pillars. So the ACR has 3 pillars. They have the researchers, they have the healthcare professionals, and then they have the patient and patient organizations. And ACR, the patient organizations isn't there, but we'll work on that. Come back to learn more about that as well, because that we also talked about that in one of our EULAR, how we're going to bridge the two. But anyway, in the EULAR Pare one, now I'm losing my rehabilitation. So in the EULAR Pare one, they had an amazing presenter, and I wrote his name down.
We love.
John Isaac.
Yep.
And
He was fabulous.
he gave a fabulous overview of COVID-19. And he really stressed the fact that we have to remember it is not just a lung disease.
Mhm.
And especially in our diseases, because our diseases are complex and multi-system. And if it is affecting brain, it's affecting heart, it's also affecting lungs, it's affecting nerves. Oh my gosh, there's so many things. I mean,
Eyes,
the whole,
liver, yeah, it just went on, and it was showing just the entire body can be affected by COVID.
and to
Didn't he
me,
have like a slide up there of the human
yes,
body?
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. And so that one, if we can share that, because we have to look and see what we have permissions to and what we don't, because some of them didn't sign off, but I would imagine that Parade did, because it's patient centered. But it was just one of the things that was one to think about, that these are full body, and as patients living with these diseases, really being in tune to our bodies, and like with me, when whatever virus I've had, again, we can't say 100% sure COVID, but this very strong virus that came upon me in March and went straight to my heart. It was strong enough to do that. I kept saying, like, I felt like I was a patient getting diagnosed again. I had that same moment of, oh my God, listen to me.
Yeah.
Seriously, this is not autoimmune.
You kept
And I,
telling us when your emergency room stories of,
Hmm.
and then one of the nurse was actually
oh my gosh, I
yes.
forgot about that. Yes.
Yeah.
That even shows you how fast COVID changes. So yeah, I'll digress for a minute, but I will share that story, because it just is about us being patients and us being vocal. And
Yeah.
when this first happened to me, it was in my first symptoms of virus, where I'll just say virus, was in March, early March. And it started with like a cough and this weird sniffle, because I didn't have any congestion. It was just a weird sniffle and a headache and a sore throat. And I just thought, oh, it's a cold. But then I started getting sort of, when I talked in a meeting, I'd have be shortness of breath, and then all of the other things, the severe myalgia, and you just tick it off. A lot of the things were happening. Well, anyway, after I got done doing a podcast, I felt like I was having a heart attack, and I knew it wasn't costochondritis, which is part of autoimmune, or where you have the inflammation of the connective tissues between your heart, because I've had that before. And I felt like there was a balloon in my chest, like pneumonia or something. And so eventually I end up at the ER. I won't tell you the whole story, but I'm there, and this is now mid-March. So again, COVID's only a couple months old. And I go in and I tell the nurse that I had just been tested for COVID, but I was 20 days in or something like that, and it came back negative. And so at the time, it was still this question, what does that mean? What, even today is still, what does it mean? But it's more accepted now that 40% of the tests that they've taken are not right. I mean, I know they say that with the swab, you have to stick it up your nose for 15 seconds. They did it for like 2. it was like in and out, first of all. But anyway, and then it all depends on how long you've had whatever. So I had gotten the test back and it said negative. So I told the nurse that in the hospital, but I was still having these symptoms. And I had said, I came back negative, but I'm telling you something. They kept saying, well, looking at my chart, well, you have spondyloarthritis and it says Behçet's disease on here. So clearly you're Behçet's disease. And good thing I didn't have a pen in my hand. I was so angry. They wouldn't listen to me. And I kept saying, this is not Behçet's. No, I've never had inflammation, because they kept saying, well, autoimmune inflammation in your heart, pericarditis, not abnormal. It was like screaming from the mountaintop. I was having flashbacks of 10 years ago. And, with these diseases. But I think it's important because we need to make sure to be our own advocates in this. So if you do have these symptoms, it's important. So the nurse essentially went, oh, okay, whatever. And she walks out and I could hear them. They're behind a sheet. It's a sheet. It's this thin. It's thinner than this because this was paper. It was fabric. And they're on the other side and they're talking about me.
I remember you telling
about, oh yeah, she's saying that she's not sure that it's negative. And so I was like, I don't remember what I said, but it wasn't nice.
Yeah, right.
And it was loud. And when they came back in, they apologized to me. But when I went back 2 weeks later, because I was still having heart issues, I was a totally different scene there. Then it was, oh my gosh, you tested negative. Well, do you know that 40% of people they're wrong. And I was like, really? Never heard that before. But anyway, yeah, we digress. But it's just an important point to be an advocate for your own health, for sure. But
Kelly made a comment. She said, I think that is something people don't understand. It can definitely be more than lungs. So definitely. And, everything that we learned definitely relate to that. Yeah, Tiffany, I remember when you were telling those stories, I felt so bad for you. And, I think they were just even questioning, yeah, right. What does she know? Or something like that behind that sheet.
Yeah, it really, I was not happy with them.
No.
But with the recovery, so one of the things they talked about is people who have the lungs happen to them and the heart and basically cardiopulmonary, that they have to start really thinking about a recovery plan to strengthen your lungs and strengthen your cardio. But it's not just recovery physically. We all have to recover mentally, because we all are experiencing some level of anxiety that has to do with this. And, whether it's about, do I have access to my biologics, or should I be off of them, or should I be on them, or will they protect me? Or, I mean, there's so much. And I think that the overarching takeaway is really that it's too new. COVID is too new. So here we are. Think about it this way. Here we are at a scientific meeting in rheumatology, one of the 2 biggest in the year. You always get the cutting edge research here. And over, we just kept hearing, because COVID, there was a lot of COVID. And that's why we started with it, because it put the conference online. But we wanted to start with it because we thought it was really a good way of prefacing the biases that can happen in research, which I think we'll kind of close up on. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But just how important research is, to have the time to do it right, or at least if it's rushed, that it clicks all the boxes, and that our voices are super important in this, and that we really need to make sure that we are sharing our stories. Because I'm going to jump back as we start to wind this down here, because I wanted to touch a little bit more about these biases we're talking about. And I think it'll also help to show how cutting edge some of the other research that we'll talk about in other overviews is, because this stuff is so new. But one of the things that came out of, I think it was the Global Rheumatology Alliance registry. So that is the one we mentioned in the beginning, that all the rheumatologists internationally came together, and we were part of helping create the patient survey for that. And some results of that, I don't know if you have them, if either one of you have them in front of you. I kind of have them by memory, I think, but I'll let you.
I have them by memory too, but like just I'm looking at one slide in particular that kind of brings back the idea about how new this is and everything. It was the conclusion from his talk was the current evidence is sparse and fragmented. You're flying blindly and covering many jurisdictions, and the updates are truly necessary. That is specific to just exactly what you just said. I don't have them on anything in particular, but again, I mean, you sum them up really easily. What the biases were, women.
Women
Yep.
was one. You said age, comorbidities.
Yep.
But what we're talking about when we're saying this is, I'm specifically referring to the GRA, or the Global Rheumatology Alliance. But this is a data bank created by rheumatologists from around the world, the best of the best. And it has some level of patient involvement in it. But it had to be put up very, very quickly. And we're trying to get as many people as possible around the world to put in the data. So you've got rheumatologists who are submitting information on their patient. By the way, my rheumatologist, even though I tested negative, I am in the GRA. I am counted in there because he firmly believed that that's what I had. Yeah. But then patients can also fill it out. But what was interesting, the information that was shown at EULAR on this, and you can look at it on their website too, because it's also posted. What Deb was mentioning, they talked about that there was a high percentage of women, a high percentage of women with rheumatoid arthritis, and not so much the other diseases.
Right.
But when we were talking about this, is people living with the diseases and people who run these kind of surveys, that is an example of a bias. And what that means is you have to take that information with a grain of salt, because who filled out the survey? Exactly. It probably got distributed to mostly women. So mostly women are going to have it because more women filled it out than men, right? I mean, that's the way you have to look at the research, because this is early research, and why you have to take all of this with a grain of salt. I didn't look at that, and I know we were talking about it, and say, oh my gosh, rheumatoid arthritis, well, they get it more.
They're the ones that answer the survey. And that's actually a common theme, I don't know why, but women with rheumatoid arthritis tend to answer research.
Get more. They do. We know that as an organization, each population, each disease population has their own personality. It's very bizarre. I can't explain it, put it into words, but the rheumatoid arthritis community seems to be the most aggressive as far as wanting to get involved in it. I don't know why. I don't know why. But there's also, there's a couple of, the spondyloarthritis is up there too. But with rheumatoid arthritis, also more people are diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, whether it's right or not. Patrice and I can attest to that, because both of us had it at one point. So it's going to make logical sense to me that women with rheumatoid arthritis are going to be higher and look like they are more susceptible to COVID. But you have to look at who took the survey, right? So I think that those things are really important to point out. And again, not discrediting. We want to preface this. We're not patients sitting here discrediting the GRA or any of the research. That's not what we're just making it clear, because they're making it clear. They're the ones who pointed out the biases, a lot of these, to us. And we noticed that as a theme throughout this whole EULAR journey, is there is a big focus on what's credible, robust research that's being conducted, checking all the boxes, and what has to be rushed because we're in COVID-19.
Right.
And we just, so I think the biggest takeaway from this is to remember everything that you're seeing is new, evolving. There's no denominator. We said that in the beginning. There's no number. We can't say X out of this many people this happened to, because nobody knows the denominator.
Right.
So we just have to keep making sure that our voices are heard, that we participate when we can in the registries, and that there is hope for our medications. I think that's very promising.
Yeah, it's huge.
That our patient population seems to be affected less, and we don't know. We just don't know at this point if that is because of our biologics. Maybe it's because we're all staying home.
Exactly. We're following
and wearing the mask.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, you don't know. You don't know. We don't know why, but you know, we'll take it. So just keep being safe. And did I miss? I know that I just want to reiterate this. We covered everything we mentioned today in great detail in debrief number 1 and debrief number 2, which also can be found on this YouTube. We just didn't want to repeat everything that we've already said for those who have been following this journey. Is there anything else, ladies, that
I would just say is, again, some of these themes that we're talking about, please join the conversation in the chat. And, you know, if you want to continue these conversations, do it on our website as well. Definitely that type of thing. Kelly she just posted exactly, there are so many unknowns, which is 100% true, Kelly, for sure. And we thank those that joined us today and hopped in. And again, we want to continue the conversation, things that, you know, what your journey's been with COVID and during this time. If it is, you know, good, bad, has it changed? Because again, some of my feelings have changed as this time has evolved, and becoming more informed too, for sure. So, you know, where your anxiety has been, how have you guys been coping as far as some of these things go?
And I just put a couple in the chat. I put a couple of links here. Let's see. All right. So let me make sure I have all of them. Deb and Patrice, can you by chance see them?
I can't see them.
Oh, okay. All right.
I see research.
Okay, there we are. Okay. Oh, I did one twice. Sorry. So let me tell you what I put in here. So we've talked several times about your voice being counted. And at AiArthritis, our entire mission is to help others like us living with AiArthritis diseases to have a voice alongside other stakeholders as equals, so together we can solve the problems that impact education, advocacy, and research. So what we're doing here is a couple things. So first, I'll go back to what we were talking about with making sure your voices are counted. We are advocating strongly, anyone in the rheumatic community, if you think that you are affected by COVID, you can see by our download today and by going back to our debriefs that have a little bit more specific information about what we learned throughout this journey, is that there is not enough data to know fully yet. So your voice is going to matter. So there's 2 links that I've put up here. One of them is aiarthritis.org/COVID-19. There we have hundreds of resources. We have over a dozen AiArthritis Voices 360 talk show breakout segments just on COVID-19. We talk to Dr. Kim. We have a rheumatologist. We have Matt Eisman, the host of Ninja Warriors. He co-hosts with me on one of them. So that's on there. We've got talking about masks with nurses, and you've got to check that out. So we've got dozens of resources on that. We also have the 3 links to the registries we talked about. So you can join any one of those. I do have to preface and say the one by Creaky Joints Global Healthy Living Foundation, it closes on July 31st, and it is only open to the US and to Canada, but the other 2 are international. The other thing that I've posted is a one of our talk show episodes, and it is called The Importance of Being Counted in Research. It's only 10 minutes long, but it might be nice to share with other people so that you can, so they don't need to necessarily come and listen to this entire part. That's a 10-minute segment talking about the importance. So you could share that one. And it also has, the page has the links to the registries as well. And then additionally, I put our website, which is AiArthritis.org. Anyone who wants to continue this journey with us to go to EULAR, here's what it means. So we have been, we meaning Deb, myself, and Patrice, we have been spending all June going through the sessions and figuring out which are most relevant to our community and to the work we do as an organization. We have since done 4 debriefs. They are all on our YouTube channel. So again, you can listen to those. They cover a lot of this in much more detail than we talked about this evening, because this part is where we're sort of going public. So starting today, and every Tuesday in July at the same time, we will come on live on YouTube and we will have discussions based on some of the most hot topics or the things that we felt were most important and that we discussed in our debriefs. We will provide a list of what those will be because I do not have them in front of me right now. That probably would have been a good thing. I know that there'll be treat to target, remission. It'll be precision medicine. So there were a few really interesting ones that we are going to branch off into. So those will be public. Just tune in. If you can't be here live, you can always come on, watch it later, put your comments on there. Or you can go to our website at AiArthritis.org, and right on the homepage, on the scrolling bar of photos, it says, go with us to EULAR. If you are a person living with rheumatic diseases, with our diseases, AiArthritis diseases, or a parent of a juvenile patient, then we invite you to go with us on a private journey to EULAR. So we have a new website called AiArthritisVoices.org that has launched. And inside there is a private group just for people who want to go with us. So we'll do more breakout discussions one-on-one with people who come into there. We'll do research reviews on abstracts and posters that we see. We'll have watch parties that are German themed. Just like with the sign, we'll make some sauerbraten. Is that what it's called? I don't even.
Yes. Yes.
I'm half German. My dad's going. By the way, she doesn't know.
By the way, that's a long process.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe I'll get a good old bratwurst.
There you go. It was delicious, but
yeah. So it will be a more intimate experience. We'll also help people who want to sign up for EULAR, because you can, if it's free for patients. So you can have access to all of these sessions if you want. They are very scientific, so they are difficult for a lot of people to follow. So you may just say, that's okay, I'll let you all tell me about it. But if you want to, we'll also help you navigate the site. And then lastly, we will have some information on there about what it's like to be at a conference, the different sections of a conference, and even maybe some behind the scenes photos of us at a conference. So we'll give you the conference experience, and we'll be doing that throughout August. So you can sign up there again at AiArthritis.org and join us, join Deb, join Patrice, join a lot of the volunteers that we have in our organization, and we will guide you through EULAR. So that's it, I think, that we have for today.
Awesome. It was a pleasure.
Yes.
And did just say one thing. She said, thanks for keeping us updated. Anxiety's been high here. I'm in Florida, where we got almost 12,000 cases in one day last week. They're refusing to close things down and simply halted things to phase 2. Once we can travel again, you can come here and I'll take you to authentic German restaurants.
That is a deal.
You're on.
Yes.
That is a deal. We have a couple here. St. Louis has a heavy, and Missouri has a heavy presence of German folk or German heritage. But yeah, I haven't my
husband's
I am.
Yep. So I love it. And all this time, even since we've still been here, I have still been doing my Duolingo, learning German language. So somewhere in my travels, I better get.
Okay, well, maybe you should close us out in German.
I don't know if I can do that.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Yeah, Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Goodbye. Da, da. Yeah, that song. Okay. Yeah, I was going to have my app up, and I
am not singing that.
No.
No, I was going to have my app up so that I could like talk into it and say something to everybody, but that's okay. That's what Deb and I do when we go to countries that we can't speak the language. Okay, so hopefully that we'll see you all again next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for public overviews. You can stay on this YouTube channel, check out any of the debriefs for all of the research that we've seen, and then you can go with us if you are a person living with these diseases or a parent of a juvenile patient by just signing up, and we will invite you to that private site. So that's all. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and keep in contact with us. Let us know more about your questions and comments on COVID-19. Also, you can do that at our Facebook page. Forgot to mention that at COVID, it's COVID-19 and AiArthritis. You can search it. It's a public group. So thank you all. Until next week, we'll see you later.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.